Welcome to the Better Together podcast, where we look for ways we can work together to advance the cause of Christ among Free Will Baptists around the world. Today we have a special treat. One of my former professors, Dr. Ken Riggs, is here, and he's going to share with us about his father. His father wrote a book, which Dr. Riggs kind of wrote. We'll get into that in a minute, called By the Way, and I want to encourage you to pick that up. He's also written a little article in the latest one magazine. It's the September edition. It's called A Tribute to Dad. And so, Dr. Riggs, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Who was Raymond Riggs?
Well, besides being my daddy and the daddy of six of us, I'm number 2 out of 6, 4 boys and 2 girls. My daddy was raised and born in Arkansas, Pocahontas, Arkansas. His father was a farmer, but also a lay preacher. He was Reverend C.E. Riggs. My mother's father was also a preacher. He was Reverend N.P. Gates. My grandfather Riggs, to my knowledge, never pastored. My grandfather Gates did pastor a church in the Detroit area. But Daddy was the oldest of 11 children, and in his early days, he married a lady, and unfortunately, 3 months later, she died. And it had such an effect on him, he almost committed suicide. But the Lord dealt with him about it, and he got the victory over it. And so then ultimately the family, both Gates and Riggs, lived in the same area of Arkansas, and they all moved to Michigan. And so Daddy took a job there, but then he felt like he wanted to begin a church in the Highland Park area of Michigan. And so he knew nobody, but he saw a grocery store. And he would buy groceries there, but he went in one day. It was an elderly couple that operated it. And he said, "Would you rent me this grocery store on Sunday so we could have church service?" Well, unbeknownst to him, they had been praying that a church could be there because they were too old to get out and go to church. And so the church came to them.
Wow.
And so Daddy would preach, and Mother would play a pump organ. And I've heard them tell the story that sometimes on Saturday, they would stand outside of the grocery store, and Mother would play the organ, and Daddy would sing, and he'd invite people to come to church the next day. Well, it ended up being the Highland Park Free Will Baptist Church that in that day was one of the largest Free Will Baptist churches in the denomination. It's the only church I knew from the time I was born until 1953 when my daddy moved us to Nashville when he became the director of foreign missions. But it was very common for us to have missionaries and pastors that would pass through or come for a revival or whatever the reason. We had pastors and missionaries in our home quite frequently. And so I got to meet a lot of missionaries that are now with the Lord, people like the Willies, people like Damon Dodd, the Finnessys, and on I could go, and other preachers as well. And so then when Daddy moved to Nashville in 1953, and the national headquarters became in Nashville, down the street from the college. Now, this was before your day, Brother Eddie, and I'm keenly aware of that. But Daddy had a way about him that I didn't understand for a while. Now, quite frankly, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but it's the truth, I went through a period of my life when I resented who my parents were. I didn't need Christianity. You know, I was a teenage boy living in Nashville, and I didn't need religion and all that kind of stuff. And so I rebelled against my parents, and I left home when I graduated from high school and got out.
Yeah.
Unbeknownst to me, I thought maybe my dad would call me to tell me to come back home. He never did. Never did. I found out later why. I think I found out. I've never talked to him about it. But in essence, what he said, son, you made your bed. I'll let you sleep in it. And I began to learn some lessons. And finally, I did come to the Lord. I came to the Lord in April of about 1960, if I remember. I graduated from high school in 1959, but lived away from home at that time. But the Lord got a hold of me. I attended the Bible college for a Bible conference service, mainly because Mother and Daddy were there. But I really didn't want to see them, but I felt obligated. And so I went to see them, and the Lord got a hold of my heart during one of the services. And I went forward and gave my life to the Lord, and the rest of it's been history.
Wow.
But then later in my life, my daddy moved. Well, he came to Nashville in 53 and stayed here until 59 as the director of foreign missions. He moved to Norfolk, Virginia, and he took another very small church, now the Bethany Free Will Baptist Church in Norfolk. Well, Daddy had been there for a good while, and now that I'm out now, I've graduated from the Bible college and all that kind of thing, was in the ministry, and my daddy called me. He said, son, I'm going to begin a Christian school. Well, I'd never heard of a Christian school in my life. It was the first one in our denomination. My daddy started the first one, and he said, I want you to come work with me. Well, I had other plans, but I said, well, Daddy, I don't know. I'm supposed to go to college. I was going to go to Bob Jones University, to be frank about it, to get a master's degree because I wanted to be a teacher. And I said, Daddy, I've already been accepted. He said, well, come up here for a week and preach for me. There's a college here you can attend. Well, I knew, because in that day and time, the Bible college was not accredited to have transfers to other colleges that weren't in the American Association of Bible Colleges. So I went to appease my dad. Well, then lo and behold, when I went over to the college, told him what I wanted to do, the dean to whom I was talking said, how long are you going to be here? I said, I'm leaving Saturday morning. He said, call me Thursday. Because I told him what I wanted to do. I wanted to get my master's degree because I wanted to be a teacher. He said, well, but the college you went to for your bachelor's isn't accredited, so I don't know whether you can come here or not. So call me Thursday. So I waited, and I went to see him on Thursday. He said, we've decided to accept you with the condition. You've got to make at least to be average during the time that you're here. Well, the rest of that's history.
Yeah.
I graduated from there, and my daddy said, see there?
Yeah.
I told you. And so I worked with my dad. Now, what he didn't know, I wanted to know, what is it about Daddy that you just asked me about? How is he, what appeal does he have? Why do people flock to my dad? And my mother too, Eddie. I've got to mention my mom with her because they were a team.
Yes.
And all that. But I found out what it was about my dad. And I believe I'm correct. I came up with it myself, but when I've told people, they say, you're right.
Yes.
My daddy knew how to love people, whoever they were. Didn't make any difference with him. Background, rich, poor, whatever, non-Free Will Baptist or not even in church anywhere. Daddy had a way of loving people, and they knew it. They sensed it. And in fact, do you know Brother Bob Shockey? Did you know Bob Shockey?
I did, yes.
Well, Bob Shockey was my pastor when I was a teenager here in Nashville. And then we both worked at the Bible college at the same time. And Bob Shockey said about my dad something I've never forgotten. He said, if I ever backslide, I want Raymond Riggs to give the invitation because I'll come back to the Lord. Because he knew Daddy's appeal.
Yes.
That he loved people, that they were just drawn to follow the Lord as a result of that. And so I found that to be true with my dad all the way through his ministry. He loved people, no matter what the occasion. There was no put on with Daddy. He was who you saw. My mother was the same way. They were a team. They were both good singers. My mother was an outstanding pianist. In fact, she and Herman Hersey for years were always the pianist and organist at the Nationals. Now then they share it around a little bit, but as I understand. But anyway, I was raised in a Christian family and in a singing family.
Talented family.
Well, yeah, all of my brothers and sisters sing. In fact, our family did cut an album that I don't know how well it did. I have copies of it, but I don't want to sell them. I've only got two.
Yeah.
But my family, all of them sing. Our older brother, was the oldest in the family, made a career in the military. He was in the Air Force until he died just a few years ago. But wherever he went, where he was in the service, there weren't Free Will Baptist churches. And so he became a Southern Baptist. But every church he went to, they found out he could sing, and they made him the music director. And so he was the music director of the church in Waco, Texas, when he died.
Wow.
And then all my other brothers, I have one brother who pastors a church in what he did out here in Pleasant View, and my brother Steve is a missionary in France, been there 30 years. And then I have two sisters, one here in Nashville and one in North Carolina, but they're very active in their respective churches, all because of the influence I'm confident about my mother and my dad. He's a talented man. The last time I heard him preach, he was 92. And I had invited him. I was then principal at Pleasant View Christian School, and I invited him because he was involved in the starting of that school. He pastored Good Springs Church, and that's where it first met. And then they bought the property. You're aware of the fact that it's a church that's operated by the Northern Quarterly churches. They are part of that. And so I invited Daddy to preach that graduation, and he was 90. Well, no, I take that back. He wasn't 92 at that time, but I did have him preach. He preached at 92. He preached at his church in Michigan for their, forget now, Eddie, been too many years, whatever anniversary it was. They had him back, and a lot of the family went up with Daddy for that service because I remember that church. I was born, raised in that church till I was 12. And so Daddy, he preached that sermon. We had a good visit together and all that. Then my mother died. My mother and Dad had 6 children. And a lot of people don't know this part of it, but my daddy remarried the 3rd time now.
Oh.
And the irony of it is, again, in your age, you won't recognize this name maybe except from history. Brother Winford Davis, who was one of the first men in Missouri
too, didn't he?
that was promoting foreign missions, was doing that. And he told my daddy, he said, you need to be doing this instead of me. Well, then lo and behold, Daddy became the general director. And whatever funds Brother Davis had accumulated, he gave. And so the rest of that's history.
Wow.
And so Daddy has been well known. I've seen my dad with his attitude of love. I've been to a national association, and it'd get kind of tense. And Daddy would go to the microphone and speak, and it would calm down. I don't know how he did that, other than the Lord gave him the gift, I guess it could be a gift of love. But it was a genuine love. It wasn't put on with Daddy. Now, Daddy was stern. I'm going to be honest about that, too. And I won't go into that much. But Daddy was a very stern man. But I have to say to you truthfully, I never heard him raise his voice except when he preached. He never screamed at us. He treated my mother very well. And then he married Sister B, Brother Davis's widow. And they had been friends, that is, Brother Davis and his wife. My mother and Daddy were friends with them. They had gone to the Holy Land together before. And so I don't know how that romance came about, but I got to go to his wedding when he
Yes.
married her. He wanted me to marry them, and I said, no, I can't do that. He said, how come? I said, well, because when you do a wedding, you marry somebody, perform it, you don't see the wedding.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see this one.
There
you
you
don't
go.
have the privilege to see your daddy get married. And so I took a camera and filmed everything to send it to the other members of the family. But Daddy he was a gifted preacher,
Mm-hmm.
a gifted singer, a gifted man. I came here early this morning before you because here in the national offices, Foreign Missions has dedicated a room called the Riggs Conference Room. I wanted to go in there again.
Mm-hmm.
Saw the picture of my mother and my father and looked around to some of the memorabilia that was there just to remember myself, the kind of man that my dad really was. He was just a good man.
A good man, a godly man.
Good man, godly man. He loved to play games like I was raised with them playing Scrabble.
Yes.
And other table games like that. But if Daddy got tired, he'd go to bed. We'd go ahead and play. But he was just I don't know another word except good and godly.
There you go.
He was that kind of a man.
And quite a legacy because Jacob's pastoring the church up in Detroit.
Yes.
And we think about the Pleasant View Christian School. It's still in operation,
Yep.
still going. So, and then you've got international missions as well. It's the influence in the family, the influence in the denomination, and the Lord's work. It just keeps going.
Well, I remember when I was in high school, Daddy, of course, was director of Foreign Missions, and I was taking Spanish, and Daddy was planning to go to Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me if I wanted to go with him. I said, well, sure. So I went to Cuba with my dad to see the firsthand college school that was there with the Willies, Pop Willie, and them, and the Finney's. I learned more Spanish in the 10 days I was there than I learned the 2 years
I'm sure
I took
you
it.
did.
Took it in high school. But we would always have missionaries in our family, in our home, and then pastors in our home.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, as I was driving in today, I was thinking about in 1953 when we moved to Nashville. I didn't understand the denominational background. I was only 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you every person that moved into those offices who were the leaders in our denomination at that time. Brother Stanley Mooneyham was the executive secretary. Bill Mishler was the Sunday school director. Ray Turnage was the director of the league department. Mrs. Eunice Edwards was the director of the ladies auxiliary. And I'm not sure if it was Damon Dodd first or it may have been Damon Dodd. I know that Homer Willis later became the director of what they called then home missions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go back with our denomination a long way.
Absolutely.
Because I remember when that building, it was a big house. I don't know if you ever saw that house down the street from the college. It was just a big 2-story house that they made offices out of. And then I went to work in that same building. And then I went to work when they moved out on the building they had before they built this one.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've seen this come to pass, and my dad's been a part of a lot of that, for
Yes.
that matter. But again, I am blessed to have the godly heritage from my grandparents as well as from my parents as well. Now I don't want to leave a false impression, Eddie. It didn't mean I always liked it.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean that I always agreed with my dad.
Mm-hmm.
But I did learn after I got right with the Lord myself, my dad was a godly man.
Yes.
And for that, I am thankful. And I think his love was because he had a tender heart.
Yes.
I used to, when I was growing up, we would have prayer, and I didn't like it because Daddy'd always have to cry while he was praying. or he'd come home from church on Sunday night and cry. And my mama would say, Raymond, what are you crying about? And nobody got saved today. See, that kind of a heart.
Oh, that's a great heart.
And so I wish I had that. I don't think I do. In fact, I don't know anybody that can give an invitation like my daddy does that draws people to come. So, and then in this book, you're correct. He wrote it. That is, he voiced it. He taped it on I don't know how many cassette tapes, and I'd play them and I'd type a while and stop it, type a while, stop it, and type some more. And so, he wrote it, but I transcribed it.
Yes, you kind of wrote it too. You typed it. So
I did, but now, Daddy read every bit of it before I had it published to be sure that I did say what he wanted me to say. Because as you read, if you buy that and read through it, he on the tapes would say, "By the way." And so I'd have to stop and go back and by the way with him and see what's he talking about now.
Yeah.
But he never lost his point. He'd always be able to come back to it. So.
Well, we thank you for sharing with us today and sharing about the life that he had, because it's something that we can all learn from as well. And we want to encourage our listeners to pick up a copy of By the Way, and also to pick up a copy of the One magazine, a tribute to Dad, because that's a pretty interesting article, and we think they'll learn a lot about your dad, a lot about you. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Riggs.
Well, Eddie, thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.
And we want to thank you all for joining us online, listening. Please share this podcast. Please like it. Encourage others. We think that this could be a good help for them. And remember, we are truly better when we work together.